Good evening. I'm Mary Husong Callan, President of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering new voters and encouraging them to get out and vote. If you're not registered to vote, or if you've moved since the last election, please stop at our table and we'll take care of that. By the way, the League of Women Voters is not for women only. Men are most welcome to join us in making democracy work. On behalf of all the members of the Rochester League, I'd like to welcome you to this forum, asking the question, can Monroe County reduce poverty by 50% in 15 years? We're proud to present this important discussion, and we're especially pleased to be able to offer a question and answer segment following the presentations. We request, of course, that all of our guests respect our panel, our hosts here at Asbury First United Methodist Church, and our League's own commitment to civil and respectful discourse. Please join me in welcoming the chairperson of the League's Poverty Committee and the coordinator of this forum, Georgia DiGregorio.
Why did I doubt that a tornado would keep you home? Really? So welcome to all of you. Many of our Monroe community was shocked back in December 2013 when Ed Doherty of the ACT Rochester presented us with a report that told us about the dire statistics about poverty level in Rochester. Mr. Doherty added when he made this presentation, we need to create an understanding that poverty is a problem for all, not just the poor. We know that poverty eats away at the foundations of a healthy community. By community, we mean not just Rochester, but also all of the area, including Monroe County and surrounding suburbs. Did you know that in Rochester itself, over 66,000 people are living in poverty? Outside of Rochester, 95,000 people are living in poverty, a third more. We depend on each other for a healthy community, both economically, culturally, in education, and in diversity. When part of us is suffering, we are all hurting. Arlene Thaler, a local photographer, has generously provided us with photos that you see around the edge of the room. They remind us that we're talking about human beings, not just statistics. The League has supported programs and policies to prevent or reduce poverty and to promote self-sufficiency for individuals and families since the 70s. So it was only natural for our local league to begin to follow the steps that were being taken by our MAPI, which is Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, and we'll get used to that term, and that coalition of groups. We interviewed many participants and read a lot of documents, but we still felt, as probably many of you, that we needed more answers. So tonight, we have a panel of 4 panelists who have committed to the goal of reducing poverty in Monroe County by 50% in 15 years. They will share the first steps that are being taken to achieve this goal, and they will also give us a hint of what we can look for in the near future. Again, the reason for this forum is to bring community members together for a better understanding, not only of the problem, and I think we've got that point, but also the pieces of remediation that fit together, and most importantly, ways that we as members of the community can support their efforts. Before I introduce the panelists, let me just review the handouts that we definitely want you to take home with you. There's a lot of stuff about the League of Women Voters over there, and that's important too, but things that relate particularly to this program. One is an agenda. Now, it gives the questions that we've already put out in our flyers and everything else that we would like to address this evening, and the names of the panelists. Secondly, there's an evaluation form, and I've been told they ran out of evaluation forms. So please take your agenda and write on the back at the end of the evening any comments that you have, and most especially tell us how you heard about this forum, because that's important for us to know how to communicate with everyone. Secondly, or thirdly, at this point, there is a community report card that ACT Rochester keeps up year after year. This is 2017. At the bottom of it is the website address, and you can go and see what it is specifically for Monroe County. And lastly, we have Connected Communities information that not only tells you about the guiding principles, etc., but also gives you an idea of the map of the area that is that they're working with, as well as a booklet that explains what Connected Communities do in the Emma and Beechwood area. Okay, now that I've covered up my agenda, here we go. The panelists are going to be talking for about 10 minutes each. And so please use your paper, write your questions down as they arise in your thought. And that way at the end, we will then go across the room and have you ask your questions. There's Tori Tolliver Powers. Tori, you raise your hand. She's with RMAPI, and that's located at United Way. There's LaShonda Leslie Smith, who is with Connected Communities. Henry Fitz, which is in the Mayor's Office of Innovation and Strategic Initiatives. And Vincent Esposito, who I didn't get to say hello to when you came in. Thank you. And he's with Empire State Development. So at that point, I think I will turn it over to Tori, and I think Tori and LaShonda, you're doing a work together, or?
LaShonda will go after me.
Okay, great, thank you. Get my stuff.
So do I just? Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. Awesome. My name is Tori Tolliver Powers. I am the Community Engagement Specialist with the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, also known as RMAPI. Dr. Brock could not be here with us on this evening, but he sends his regards. At this time, I'm just going to give an overview of who we are, what we do, and what we're in the process of implementing. So as Georgia mentioned, please write your questions down, and we will attempt to address those at the end of our presentations. So RMAPI is a convener. RMAPI is creating a new philosophy and practices to bring about systematic, sustainable change. Unlike other initiatives, we are community informed. We have voice and input of involvement of people who are living in poverty, and who we have had over 400 institutions involved from the beginning, and more than 1,000, community persons engaged to date. We're really about shared goals and being intentional and deliberate, and really demonstrating those practices across our stakeholders. We are not a service provider, a funder, a competitor, nor a program. We do not administrate funds, nor do we compete for funding. We are really about systems change. We are about a collaborative effort. We are not focused on programs. Programs do not solve poverty, as many have said. It's many stakeholders that have said we are program rich, systems poor, which result in poor outcomes. So again, we're about aligning priorities, aligning services, and aligning funding sources. So just look at this infographic we have here. Our MAPI, just look at, picture our MAPI as the power strip. And the partners are plugging into the power strip, which allows our MAPI to align collaborative efforts, the community priorities, shared goals, and the guiding principles. And how many have heard of the guiding principles for our MAPI? Good to know. Can someone tell me what one of the guiding principles is? Yes?
Considering racial disparity when you are adopting policies and programs.
Correct, also known as structural racism. So the three founding principles are structural racism, trauma, and community building. Structural racism is policies and practices that promote racial inequity. Trauma is about mental, physical, and emotional health issues resulting from the concentration of poverty. Community building is about incorporating resources and jobs available within the community. Again, we need to address all of these items collectively to have a person-centered approach. And as you can see, Pathways to Prosperity, our MAPI, the Mayor's Office of Innovation, which is Henry's department, Rock the Future, Connected Communities, which is LaShonda, and Pathways to Prosperity is an arm, an extension for the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council. So that's a long one for me. So really about aligning what we want to see to come out for these people. We really want to take a person-centered approach. So we are working hand in glove together. So we are connected. And we are really about infusing the guiding principles. And as you know, the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council was really instrumental in our MAPI working hand in glove to incorporate the guiding principles into the funding application process for those seeking state funding. The council created a poverty impact statement that filtered in when people had to complete their applications to define how they would propose projects that align with the guiding principles as of structural racism, trauma, and community building. So again, it's giving an example of collectively addressing barriers, shifting community values, and incorporating those principles. Go on to the next one. The brewery applied for funding. And with that funding, the Economic Development Council wanted to know what the brewery was going to do in response to the poverty impact statement. And the brewery promised they're going to hire 124 people. And out of that 124, 68 people will be people that are impacted by poverty. So that was a win for our MAPI. Also, we have the Market-Driven Community Corporation, which is led by the City of Rochester. This program aims to create a network of community-based, employee-owned businesses that provide employment for individuals facing most significant barriers. This is an example of community building. We also have Kiva Rochester, which Henry will touch on. And Kiva Rochester is a program that follows a recommendation that our MAPI submitted. It's part of the 33 recommendations, and one of the recommendations was the Workforce Development Work Group. We also have the Adult Mentoring Program, which is another recommendation of our MAPI, which supports the Job and Workforce Development Work Group. And adult mentoring is to address the need for adult mentoring services for those living in poverty, below the poverty level, seeking to achieve economic self-sufficiency. The program connects these individuals with professional mentors, and there's also a model of peer-to-peer mentors who will help identify social economic needs and develop a specialized plan of goals and actions to reach that point. The program is being rolled out in 3 neighborhoods and part of a particular neighborhood, and the 3 neighborhoods widely are Market View Heights, Emma and Beechwood, and a part of Colnea. The adult mentoring implementation strategy is also known as Bridges to Success. So if you hear Bridges to Success, that is also what the adult mentoring program is. Nope, go back one.
Okay.
So I mentioned the first implementation strategy of adult mentoring. The next one will be early childhood supports. We're in the process of submitting a proposal to the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council. So we're in the process of working that out. So you'll be hearing more about that. And then systems design. Please note, these are all pilots. These are pilots and that are being tested for best practices that will be shared throughout the county. And that's why we're starting in a subset of the city, because we don't want to go too big. We want to start small because we want to do it right. It took us a long time to get here, so we can't achieve and have everybody move out of poverty overnight. So that's why we have a long and lengthy goal. And again, as I mentioned, we didn't get out here overnight, but we want to make sure we do it right. In order for us to do it right, our MAPI recognized that we needed the CAC. The CAC is not only serving our MAPI, CAC members also advise partners and work such as the MDCC. The CAC is the Community Advisory Council, and it really helps, you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry. It helps connect grassroots to treetops so that voices are heard and priorities are communicated. So again, we really want to get this right. We don't want to go fast and furious. How many know there's 9 Fast and Furious? We want to go slow because we want to do it right. So again, the Community Advisory is a group of community members throughout the county. It's not just particularly Emma, Beechwood, or Cornea. It's members from across the county. We have 15 members now, and it's really contributing to decisions and actions, and it, as I mentioned, it includes citizens across the region. And as I have pointed out, you go to the next slide. As I have pointed out, our MAPI is really about partnerships. And I'm closing with this infographic again and passing the baton to my colleague and partner, LaShonda. And prior to LaShonda coming up, our website is endingpovertynow.org.
So I wonder, do I need that microphone?
Yes, I do. They're on, sorry. Okay. I'm usually loud enough. Trust me, I've been told. When I was in 4th grade, my 4th grade teacher put me into oratorical contests because he wanted to use my gift for good and not evil. So if we can go to the next slide. As mentioned, I'm LaShonda Leslie Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Connected Communities, which is a relatively new nonprofit. We are a 501c3 located in the Beechwood and Emmett neighborhoods. As Tori had pointed out, we are a part of this collective impact process team, if you will. And so it's not just one entity. I think that's one of the things that we want to drive home with all of you guys this evening, that there isn't one initiative, there are multiple initiatives that are operating in the same space for the purpose of working very collaboratively together to ensure that we are really hitting this problem head on and making sure that we're having a long-term impact. Tori had mentioned a little bit earlier that this city has been said that it is resource rich and results poor. Well, it's about time we start really focusing in. And so what we found is that there are numerous organizations that are doing really good work in their own silos, but working collaboratively across communications and really creating these systems to ensure that people do not fall through the cracks. We've not done a really good job at that. And Rochester has quite a rich history, and we want to be able to ensure that everyone can take advantage of those kinds of opportunities. So we've been very intentional
around this circle, and even all of the organizations and initiatives that are supporting this are not really represented on this flyer, but I want you guys to really understand that this is a collective impact process, and those kinds of things do not, as Tori mentioned, take place overnight. It is a long-term, very intentional process, so much so that many of us meet bi-weekly for 2 hours at a time, just making sure that we're updated on each of the programs or systems that we're implementing to make sure that they work for one another. We can go to the next slide. So I'm gonna have to put my glasses on. I was wondering about that as well. So we're what we might consider a community quarterback. Very much like our mapping, we are a convener, a connector, a resource finder. We are not a service provider. If we go to the next slide. We're not a service provider, and we're not an extension of any one neighborhood association. Though we are located in the Emma neighborhood and we work on behalf of Emma and Beechwood, and if you have that flyer that was handed out, on the second page it will show you a map of our neighborhood that we're working in. We're working and targeting about 8,000 people in that community, working very closely with number 33 school as well as East High School, and ensuring that quality seats are created in the neighborhood. We are also not a direct service organization or a purpose-built community. How many of you have heard of purpose-built communities? Okay, so a few people in the audience. So Connected Communities is, in addition to, I'm so sorry, thank you. Why don't we just put that on silent? Never.
You're interrupting your own speech.
I am. I'm so sorry about that.
Just in case you had to leave, right?
Just in case, just in case. Vinny's the only one that's gonna get a call from the governor, so I think I'll be good. So let's see, what was I saying? We're not a purpose-built community. So Connected Communities, in addition to working very directly on the ground with residents in the neighborhood, we are also charged with trying to become the first purpose-built community in the state of New York. So what is a purpose-built community? A purpose-built community is an organization, or a community rather, that addresses poverty in a very holistic way. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in just a little while. So we can go to the next slide. So if we look to our vision, you gotta hit it a couple times. Yep. Our vision and mission, our vision is that Emma and Beechwood are thriving neighborhoods with educational excellence, quality affordable housing, community wellness, and increased opportunity for all. And our mission, if we go to hit the next one, is to break the cycle of poverty and revitalize the Beechwood and Emma neighborhoods. We can go to the next slide. I'm sorry we don't have a clicker. You can click this a couple times. Yep, one more time. There we go. So we value shared leadership, and we act with empathy and compassion, and we build sustainability, by empowering residents. So Connected Communities is very, very purposeful about working with residents in the neighborhood. We do believe that if for whatever reason all of the resources go away and Connected Communities is not able to employ an executive director or any staffing, anything that we put in place should be sustainable. Residents should be able to continue the work in their neighborhoods with or without us. So we know that we have to come alongside of community members, neighborhood associations, businesses, residents right now in a public-private venture to ensure that they're advocated for, that they have the resources that they need. But should we have to go away, that work should be able to continue. So we really value those things, and we're very intentional about that. We can go to the next slide. So this is how our work has been informed by residents, one-on-one. When I first started this position, and I've been in this position for only a year now, Connected Communities is that young, so we're younger than our mapping. I met with every single resident that wanted to meet with me. That was very important, to sit down, to have conversations, because no one wants to come into a community and say, this is what you all need to be successful. And this is what healthy living looks like for Emma residents or Beechwood residents. But instead, we ask the question, what would you like to see in your community? What are the assets that currently exist in your community that we can help you build on? And so that has been very important. But then also there's a ton of research to support the kind of work that we're doing. And that includes IBM's Smarter Cities team, the work that they did, obviously research from our MAPI's efforts. City of Rochester has done a ton of research around the issues that we're experiencing, and then also Finger Lakes Forward. So we have numerous funders. We are very fortunate that we have been, you can hit it again for our partners as well. Looks like that's gonna go one at a time. Just fun, 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 without a clicker, right? So we have been very fortunate to be funded by the Big Five and several other funders to start up an enterprise. This tells you that Rochester is in a very unique place because funders don't fund enterprises, all right? But they understood that in order to have this community quarterback whose sole responsibility was to be on the ground, working with the residents, connecting and convening resources, advocating for this neighborhood, that you needed a full-time staff person there on the ground to do that work. So we've been very fortunate that these individuals and these companies and organizations have said, yes, we want to support this. We would like to see the purpose-built model come to the city of Rochester in particular, and we'd like to see people lifted out of poverty, and we understand that that is a long-term initiative, that again, it will not take place overnight, but it also will need some money to fund those efforts. So we are very grateful to those funders. And then we, of course, have numerous partners because this, again, is not work that you can do in a vacuum. You cannot be siloed doing this kind of community work. It has to be very collaborative. So we have numerous neighborhood associations, residents, organizations, anchor institutions like the University of Rochester, St. John Fisher College, etc., are all represented on our board, as well as Beechwood Neighborhood Association members in addition to these private entities. We can go on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about purpose-built. So purpose-built requires that we have, in order to be designated as a purpose-built community, we need to have a defined geographic location, which we do, Beechwood and Emma. We need to have a community quarterback, which has been established and hired an executive director. So that's Connected Communities. And then we need detailed plans for mixed income housing, cradle to career, education, and community wellness. We can go to the next slide. So our approach is to make sure that we're taking a collective impact, as I've talked about. We are geographically focused. And so why Beechwood and Emma? So you may have heard Dr. Brock say this before, that these neighborhoods have the hottest fire, but they're closest to water. So in other words, there's a high level of concentrated poverty in these neighborhoods. There's almost nothing you can do to revitalize a community without breaking up that concentrated poverty. But there's also significant assets in these neighborhoods as well. And so we need to begin building on those assets and figuring out what is already working for you in your community and how do we make that continue to work. So we're asset-based development, and we really believe in holistic revitalization. So we're not taking one thing first, like housing, or really just working with education. We are working across systems and across the spectrum to make sure that we're really capturing all of the support that people need in order to not only be lifted out of poverty, but to sustain themselves and not have to go back to long-term support. We can go to the next slide. So we teased out of those 3 priorities that purpose-built communities have, and we added economic development. So our focus is education, mixed income housing, wellness, and economic development. With education, I briefly mentioned this, us working very closely with number 33 school, which, by the way, is the largest elementary school in Monroe County. They have about 1,200 students that are enrolled there, and only 21% of the students who attend there actually live in the neighborhood. So we have a new focus on community schools and neighborhood schools, and how do we ensure, as we are revitalizing the neighborhood and pouring new resources into the neighborhood, that the kids who attend the school in the neighborhood and the families that live in the neighborhood can all benefit. If we have children who are going to our neighborhood school, but then they get on the bus and they go across town to Genesee Street after school, but then there's emergency housing or affordable housing, in that neighborhood, their families can't take advantage of it if we're really focused in on folks who live only in the neighborhood. So we're really working toward community schools. In addition to that, when you have community schools, you have neighborhood schools, you build and breed a sense of community, a sense of ownership, a sense of affiliation that our kids don't have because they're going all over the place. If you are a child and you live in a suburban community outside of Rochester, you know what high school you're going to. You probably have older siblings who've gone to that high school. You may wear the t-shirt, you know what the mascot is, you go to the basketball games and the football games. There's a sense of pride, a sense of camaraderie, maybe even some healthy rivalry between towns. Kids living in Rochester don't have that because they're all over the place. Likewise with East High School, only about 5% of their student population live in the neighborhood. And we do think that in order to build a sense of affiliation to the neighborhood and a sense of community, that neighborhood schools and community schools is the approach. And it's been something that our residents have said we really want to focus in on. Many of the 16 purpose-built communities across the country have implemented a charter model into their system, and our residents have been very advocate, have been very vocal about us focusing in on the two institutions that are right in our neighborhood. As far as mixed income housing is concerned, we have a partnership with Hillside and Home Leasing, and there is a brand new 72 unit home housing complex that's going up right on East Main Street, right across the street from RGRTA. And that mixed income community will have only 4 market rate apartments, and the remainder will be for affordable, and 16 of those units will be for folks with developmental disabilities. So again, Connected Communities will have a support staff that will be on site and will ensure that we recruit residents from within the neighborhood to take advantage of those brand new, affordable, and attractive housing community, but also that they're able to sustain there. That's, so that's sometimes the missing piece for our residents in this community. They can find something, but sustaining it long-term may be difficult. So we want to make sure we provide support for them. And then wellness. We're thinking about things like just the overall aesthetics of the neighborhood, walkable, bikeable streets, tree-lined streets, things that really give people a sense of pride and a sense of attachment to their community. And then of course, economic development, creating jobs, working with businesses, particularly in the East Main Street area between Goodman and Culver Road. We're focused in, we just actually recently finished a business survey to determine what types of products and services residents want to see in that neighborhood, and we're recruiting businesses that will help to fulfill that need for residents in the neighborhood, and also working with organizations like the Market Driven Community Cooperative to bring in new businesses into our neighborhood, and then hiring people directly from the neighborhood. That way people can live, work, and play safely in their community. Go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm sure I'm over my 10 minutes. I told y'all I can talk. So this is my contact information. If anyone wants to reach me, we'll have a time for a question and answer. And then I'm always happy to give you my business card at the end of this if you would like to have a sit-down conversation to talk about this work in more detail. Thank you. So we'll call Henry on up, and he will tell you a little bit about the Mayor's Office of Innovation.
Good evening, folks. As LaShonda said, I'm Henry Fitz. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Innovation at the City of Rochester. Next slide, please. So a little bit about my team. We are a small team that was formed in 2015. We're a centralized office in the Mayor's office reporting to Mayor Lovely Warren. And we can be deployed by the Mayor to address critical civic issues, as well as work with internal departments and external partners to develop programs, do data analysis, make sure we're making great data-driven decision-making. Our initial focus area has been the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative and Anti-Poverty Strategies, and we've been working closely with them for a long time. So, a little bit about this buzzword, innovation. What do we mean by this? Well, to us, innovation is a problem-solving approach, which starts with a firm understanding of the problem at hand. So we truly believe, before you start throwing around potential solutions, you need to dig into the problem. And we do that in these areas. First, look at available data, census data, city data, data that we collect to inform us on the statistics and the facts about an issue. But data is only one piece of the picture. We need to supplement that with actually speaking to residents, to experts who deal with these issues each day, who live these experiences. And we do that through surveys, focus groups, and things of that nature. And then finally, we do take a look at current historical research, what other cities are doing around these issues, what's being successful, what's actually been tried in Rochester in the past, why things may have failed, and what we can learn from all this as we begin to develop new solutions today. Next. So again, I think we covered the problem very, very well, and I'm very glad that our community is really up to speed with the severity of the poverty issue, because it is dire. We are now number 4 in the United States for the top cities in terms of poverty rate, and compared to our peers, mid-sized cities, we are number 1 across the board for poverty rate, for child poverty rate, and for extreme poverty rate for families living below 50% of the poverty threshold. Very, very severe situation. And in addition to the severity, one of Rochester's unique factors is the concentration of poverty, and that we have a large contiguous area of our city where over 40%, and in some cases over 60% of residents are living in poverty in certain pockets. It's an area that visitors and even longtime residents really might not see unless they're really trying to. And that's part of our problem, that this area is dislocated and removed from areas of opportunity, that there are very few jobs, there's very little investment, and it's a really tough situation to address through traditional strategies. So, as I mentioned, my team's been working closely with the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative for some time now. We lend our capacity, especially in these areas of data analysis, mapping, program design, and evaluation, so that we know that our MAPI and our partners are making sound, data-driven decisions, that we're launching programs with the capacity to collect and analyze data and improve their effectiveness, and that we can measure our success over the long term. And we're redefining the way our community works together in terms of collective impact. We are all not just doing our own things, we're actually all coming together under a larger vision, a larger strategy. We're sharing, we're creating shared goals, we're measuring ourselves consistently, and our activities are mutually reinforcing and hopefully not duplicating efforts. And we meet very, very frequently. Next. So one of the first contributions my team helped make to our MAPI and our community was in this geographic focus. We knew that with the concentration of poverty that we face, we need to have a concentrated approach. We need to pick an area of the city that we can start and that we can use as a testing ground for some of our new strategies, so we can measure them rigorously to know if they're working before we scale them up to the rest of our community. And we helped lead a data-driven analysis that looked at a lot of different data factors, and essentially, as Tori and LaShunda have mentioned, we looked for an area that had its issues, had poverty, had vacancy, crime, but also had a lot going for it at the same time in terms of assets and things to build upon. And that analysis led us to the selection of these neighborhoods, the Markview Heights, Beechwood, Emma, Bensonhurst neighborhoods, which is what we call the catchment area, the pilot district, depending on who you talk to. And as you see, Connected Communities is working in Beechwood and Emma, and then the rest of our community really is focusing all these neighborhoods collectively, and are planning to focus energy and investment and measurement in these neighborhoods over the next several years. So as soon as we selected the area, we also wanted to make sure we did a deep dive into the data on these neighborhoods specifically, so we know what are some of those unique factors about these neighborhoods as we begin to tailor our strategies. So we looked at some of the census data, and when census data didn't go far enough, we even helped implement a door-to-door survey, which asked our residents directly about their perceptions to barriers to employment, to how access to services, things of that nature. We found some really important findings that have really helped steer the work of my team as well as our community partners. Some of the highlights I have listed here. Of those folks who are employed in these neighborhoods, less than 5% are working in these neighborhoods. Over 50% are commuting out to jobs in the suburbs. Really reinforcing transportation is a critical barrier that we need to address. We also saw that over 1,000 adults in poverty in these neighborhoods had some college experience. So people are taking steps to improve their lives. They're taking steps to lift themselves up, but there are still barriers that they're facing to getting jobs and advancing. Among the door-to-door survey results, I think some community members were surprised to see the amount of smartphones that residents had, that almost 80% had a smartphone, and opens up opportunities for ways we can interact and get information to people. Mental health and addiction services were the biggest issue that people felt in their neighborhoods, as well as the biggest service gap in these neighborhoods. So I'm going to touch briefly on a few of the projects in which my team's involved, and each of these could probably warrant an hour presentation, so I'm going to try and breeze through and we can come back if we need to. So first is one we are working on closely with our MAPI as well as the implementing partners. This is the Bridges to Success program, which is one of our MAPI signature first wave programs. It's being implemented by Catholic Family Center, ABC, and Community Place. And my team's involved on the evaluation side, partnering with MIT and Notre Dame University on the evaluation, which is being structured very rigorously so we can capture the information and then present how effective this program is. And today, the funding landscape is shifting towards intense focus on outcomes and rigorous evaluation. And we know that if we can do that, we can show this program is successful, we open ourselves up for sustainable funding sources and new types of financing for programs. As Tori mentioned, this program is intended to help serve a head of household by providing them supports on their journey towards economic self-sufficiency and independence. And there's two models being piloted simultaneously. One is a professional mentor model where they have head of household has a life coach who works with them to set goals and connect them with services to meet those goals. The other is a peer mentoring model where heads of household come together and support each other and set goals together and hold each other accountable. And we're going to be launching those together and comparing them. Both of these programs are currently going through under active recruitment, recruiting from those same target neighborhoods, which we showed you before. And this is just a zoom in on a few of the evaluation details. Some of the key metrics that we're going to be tracking are change in earnings for participants, employment status, public benefits utilization. And we're measuring those based on surveys of the participants, in-program scaling tool that they use to set goals, as well as data that we're going to be able to capture from some of our state and local government partners in terms of benefits utilization, as well as from the Department of Labor, things like earnings from unemployment insurance. And after a long period of time, we're going to have some very, very rigorous data to know if this program is working or if it's not. And if it's not working, we'll know a lot about why not and how we can tweak it to make sure it does. And then on to a few of the city's own projects underneath the RMAP umbrella. The first is a transportation pilot program that we started in late 2016. It's a commuter van pool program. You can think of it a lot like a carpool, except all the riders in this program share a vehicle that's provided to them by our contracted van pool turnkey provider, V-Ride. They're a subsidiary of Enterprise. They own the vehicle, they manage the ride matching, the insurance, and the payment system. So all the folks can meet up at a library or a place where they can keep the vehicle, get in the van, they take it to work, they work there at their shift at a place, potentially a mall or another employment site that's not well served by the bus system. At the end of their shift, they all come back to the vehicle, take the vehicle back, and it lives in the neighborhood at night. And they share the costs, and the city is helping subsidize this pilot through our funding sources, making sure we're launching it small, measuring it rigorously, making sure it works, and we're hoping to scale it up coming this summer and this fall. And the great thing about it is it's financially sustainable through the same funding sources that fund the bus system. After 2 years, we get paid back based on the mileage that the van travels. And because it's actually a lot less expensive to run a van with 7 people in it than a bus with 7 people in it, it actually, financially, the model works quite well. All right, next one is our market-driven community cooperatives initiative. Again, in some of the RMAPI initial data analysis and community planning sessions identified this lack of jobs located in our most distressed neighborhoods, a lack of access to opportunity. And the mayor asked me and our team to look at innovative solutions that were having success, specifically creating jobs in distressed communities. And we found a model in Cleveland, Ohio that has been successful doing this, working in partnership with these anchor institutions like RU of R, RIT, Rochester Regional Health, these large place-based institutions that are rooted in our community. That part of their mission is to benefit our community, and we know they're going to be here for a long time. But they also are now becoming our largest employers, and they have a lot of economic activity flows through those organizations. They buy a lot, they spend a lot. So they're actually good, reliable purchasers that we can build businesses around, and that's what they did in Cleveland. They built 3 worker-owned businesses that have a mission to hire from distressed neighborhoods that serve their institutions. They have an industrial laundry facility that does linens and sheets for the hospitals and hotels. They have a large-scale greenhouse that does herbs and microgreens. And then they have an energy services company that installs LED lights and solar panels for their energy needs. They have over 110 employees and continue to grow, and each of the businesses is profitable. So we set out to replicate this model in Rochester, actually now over 2 years ago through an initial feasibility study. And we are excited to announce that we've just recently launched our first business, which is a similar green energy construction company that's doing its first jobs at Rochester General Hospital, helping retrofit their LED lights in their parking garages and moving next into the hospital itself. We also have other additional contracts lined up in the solar space. Importantly, each of these businesses is launched underneath an umbrella nonprofit corporation, which continues to own and support these subsidiary businesses. On the board of that nonprofit are those key anchor institution partners who continue to be long-term purchasers and continue to work with us to find additional business opportunities. We also have residents from the Community Advisory Council, neighborhood residents, the funders, business community, to help us make sure that... No worries. Well, we're on a time limit now, right? But yeah, great board that we've assembled to help make sure the businesses we launch are going to be successful, and that they help us find additional opportunities and funding opportunities to continue to grow the impact of this work. We're projected to hire up to 14 in this first year of Enrock, our first business, and have the next businesses already in the pipeline. Importantly, another overlap, I like to always continually connect back the participants in the RMAPI Bridges to Success program who are going through that program, who are taking steps to advance themselves towards self-sufficiency, are some of those are going to get priority hires into these jobs. So all these initiatives and programs connect very, very importantly.
That's right.
Okay, last one is our Keep It Microfinance program. Again, looking at the data, we see that very, very few business loans are made in our most distressed neighborhoods, and especially for small and micro businesses, access to capital is very, very difficult because people's credit, business credit and personal credit are often intertwined. People may not have a credit history. They may not have the skills to go to a very traditional bank to secure a loan. And this is an issue across the country that cities are seeing. Thankfully, there is a great partner out there called Kiva who is helping bring crowd-funded loans through a great platform to cities across the United States and we helped found a chapter of Kiva here in Rochester, administered through the city, and our business development team built right into our existing suite of services for businesses. So instead of a traditional business loan where you need to supply credit score, cash flow, a lot of hard numbers, instead of that traditional underwriting process, Kiva looks at what they call social underwriting and different measures of trustworthiness and risk of their borrowers. Instead of looking at those numbers and being a firm cutoff, Kiva looks at how do people in your personal network trust you? Would they trust you with their money? If they do, that's a pretty good measure of trustworthiness. And so Kiva does that. Basically, you can write a business plan, come to the our Kiva office if you need additional support services. We'll help connect you with a variety of already existing local nonprofits that help people do business plans and help develop their ideas. And when they're ready, come back to Kiva, submit an application, post your business plan, and before you can access the millions of users who use the Kiva Online's platform, you go through a personal fundraising session where you need to secure somewhere between 15 and 25 personal connections, $25 from each of them. And they find that that is the single biggest step that helps screen out risky borrowers. Because if your aunt, your dad, your neighbor doesn't trust you with $25, why should the internet? So they found when they implemented that step, their risk really plummeted, and they now have over 89% repayment rate across the U.S. So the city, for qualifying businesses, the city matches online lenders dollar to dollar to help each of those businesses raise their money faster and quick and easier, which is great. And so far we've loaned over $130,000 to over 24 businesses, 3 of which are located in our target neighborhoods. And Kiva is actually one in which you can get involved very directly. If you're not already a Kiva user, I really encourage you to go to kiva.org and create an account. It's very easy. And go on there, search Rochester, New York, see if there's any businesses that are currently fundraising, and consider making a loan, $25 or more. It's very easy, very user-friendly. It's all done through PayPal for the lender as well as the business. And if you're connected with businesses yourself, help refer businesses to us, potentially be a trustee, mentor, and guide businesses as they take a journey through the Kiva process. It's a really important role. All right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's been a few years since I've been in front of the League of Women Voters, and I've always enjoyed being here, and thank you very much, not only for being here tonight, but for all that you do to keep the civic presence in our community going so strong on nights like this. I'm Vinny Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of the Finger Lakes Regional Office of Empire State Development, which is the state's economic development agency. It also has a dual role where I'm the Executive Director of the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council. So you've heard from 3 excellent speakers tonight, 3 partners, people we're working with as part of our efforts to reduce poverty. My job is to try to give you some sense of how the state is playing a role in this as a partner, primarily through the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, and give you some context, and then obviously get to questions so you can get all the things we talked about answered that don't seem to make much sense. But hopefully you're starting to see where the alignment really comes into play. So if you don't mind, we'll continue right into this. And I sort of always start these presentations as a state employee and one who's appointed by the governor, contractually obligated to mention him in everything we do, but especially when it comes to upstate economic development and addressing poverty. What you have on here are just a few things since he came into office in 2011 where he's really tried to change the paradigm of upstate New York, where we faced decades of stagnation and decline in some cases in economic development, and of course trends and statistics of our poverty situation going also in the wrong direction. So in the last few years, you've seen major state initiatives unfold. I'm going to talk about a couple of them, and these are in addition to some of the other things, some of the other policy efforts the state has taken a leadership role on. You may have heard of things like raising the minimum wage, most recently things like free college tuition in SUNY schools, and several other things at a policy level, in addition to just the local efforts where the governor is really leading. And I want to make sure people have an opportunity to see those things. So we'll keep going right into it. The Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, hopefully by now you know, is a group appointed by Governor Cuomo of stakeholders based in this region. And the way I like to describe them is they're the primary advisory board for the greater Rochester region to the state on all things economic. Their primary job is to develop the regional strategic plan that we try to implement at a local level, and then identify the priorities for state funding to implement and reach the goals identified in the strategic plan. And it's a model that didn't exist before Governor Cuomo, where the region is given a stronger voice through the stakeholders being business owners, labor leaders, university leaders, community partners at nonprofit organizations, having a more direct voice into the decisions that Albany makes. It's a different paradigm. It's one that has its pluses and minuses, but has really changed the nature of which each region can sort of take a stake in its own future and ask Albany to help in that. And that's what the council is all about, and that's what the work we've been doing for the last several years. If you continue. One of the things I really want to talk about is what the council is doing to help in our community. What you see here is a lot more than just poverty. The Regional Economic Development Council has a big job. It's to deal with the entire regional economic environment. And what you see here is the structural framework, what we call our house, that is our strategic plan. So 2 years ago, the council created a new regional economic plan that is visualized right here. It was done as part of the major competition for the Upstate Revitalization Initiative, which was commonly called the Hunger Games, wherein 3 upstate regions won a commitment of $500 million to their region over the next 5 years for implementation and growing their economy through focused investment. This was the plan that won our region one of those $500 million commitments. And the things I want to point out for this forum are noteworthy, and that at the top, you see the goals that exist in almost any economic development program: growing jobs, driving private investment, and growing regional wealth. That's basic economic development stuff. But what is new and different is this regional council, because it is affiliated and aligned and partnered with the community's anti-poverty efforts, added poverty reduction as a primary goal. And that's one we take seriously now in all of the economic development initiatives and decisions we make going forward. And then within that framework, you see the industries that you might have heard a lot about in the news. I'm not going to cover them now, where we're investing a lot of our dollars. But then you also see in the bottom left what we call pathways to prosperity. It's an expanded vision of workforce development. You know you need a skilled and educated workforce to grow your economy, but we need to think bigger than just retooling or retraining or sending kids to college. From cradle to career, to make sure that everyone can participate in some level of the skills gap that exists in our economy, to be productive and move towards self-sufficiency, as Henry and others have talked about. And that's where the council really starts to play in this conversation, and why I'm at the table in so many conversations and what we're doing to fund some of the things that have already been mentioned. So if you continue. I won't need to really oversee what RMAPI is. Hopefully you've got a sense of that now. That's why we're all here. But the council is a participant. It is a partner. It is an organization involved in the collective impact model that RMAPI is driving, so you can keep moving forward. We've also covered in Tori's presentation the basic sort of structural framework of what RMAPI is doing, the guiding principles, and then the 3 primary areas of focus to start. Again, you're going to see how the council comes in if we continue. And so you see here on this page what was in that strategic plan that was done in 2015 that won the $500 million is one of the pages that addresses how the regional council is going to play in helping our region's anti-poverty efforts. And you start to see a very familiar pattern, which is a Venn diagram of concentric circles, where there's overlap. Because obviously everything we're doing in the Economic Development Council, whether it be photonics or agriculture, isn't necessarily an anti-poverty strategy. And everything the Anti-Poverty Initiative is doing, particularly when it gets into areas of things like mental health and social service, isn't really economic development, but there is a very large and very significant and very important overlap. And that's where the council comes in as one of the partners you saw in Tori's map that helps with this. And so if you go to the next slide, I'll start to define it a little further. You'll start to hear some of the terms you've heard tonight come together and maybe get a better sense of how they fit together. So here now you see everything stripped away into a much more basic sense. You have the major initiative the governor put in place for the regional council in addressing our economic development at a regional level. you see everything REMAPI is doing as a collective impact model in our economy, and then you put it together where we've identified this pathways to prosperity, sort of this term we're using as part of the Finger Lakes Forward Council and the Finger Lakes Forward Plan to move forward. And if you go to the next slide, you start to see a lot more detail. And I know this is a little hard to read, but you'll start to get a sense of where things fit and where they don't, and how some of the funding comes into play from that $500 million, as well as other state sources, which are considerable and playing a role here. And so you start to see, if we strip away where the overlap becomes in the pathways to prosperity, how there are some things that fit within the anti-poverty work, and you start to see some of these other terms that you've heard a lot about. Things like the One Community Plan at the top, which is the STAR. These are the 4 primary areas, the 4 priorities that the council and the community have identified as the first places the state should invest money to start to attack this problem. You've heard from a few of them. Adult mentoring, what is now Bridges to Success, the pilot program the Catholic Family Center is helping to implement, is something the regional council funded. Youth mentoring. A Hillside Work Scholarship Connection, a long-time successful program in this community to help at-risk youth get jobs and get mentoring, is something that was funded by the regional council. Skills training expansion in the STEM fields at Eastman Business Park, a place of enormous focus of the Regional Economic Development Council. They're going to have a new training center on a bus line at AVP, specific for people who want to get into those advanced manufacturing photonics jobs, funded by the regional council. And you start to see the ways in which these things overlap, and then you see this thing called the Prosperity Fund, where we are also leveraging private dollars from this community and other national foundations to match the state dollars, to make those dollars go farther, which is one of the economic development strategies we employ in any kind of deal that we do. And then you see the other things we're doing, the Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative, which was then the governor taking the thing he created in Rochester as its sort of pilot, a task force to focus on poverty in this community where we were most ready to address it, taking those lessons statewide. And you can just see how they start to overlap in a way that starts to make sense, because one of the greatest challenges we have is you've heard so many things tonight already from these 3 speakers, your head's probably spinning already. The people who are most directly involved in this have the same problem. There is so much good happening in this community, so many people doing the right thing. We all need to get organized and together and aligned in a way that is more impactful, so that we don't say anymore, we are program rich and result poor. We start to put together those programs and those efforts and do them smarter. And that's what this is all about, and that's one of the ways the regional council is coming to be into helping with that. In the 2 other examples, Tori also mentioned sort of tangible ways the council is helping in addition to those specific anti-poverty programs, is raising awareness among business leaders. Doing what we now have is an anti-poverty impact statement. So if you apply to the regional council for funding, you are asked to fill out a questionnaire that tells this council, and by extent this community, what your project will do to help with the goal of reducing poverty by 15% in 50 years. How are you addressing those guiding principles and the primary barriers? That's a level of education and awareness that isn't necessarily talked about as explicitly and as directly as it needs to be. We need to raise that bar. The council is helping to do that. And we have seen companies step up, most notably Genesee Brewery, in a direct way to make commitments to hire people impacted by poverty as a result of those efforts, and get an extra incentive through the regional council to do so that maybe they can meet the extra training burden, the extra transportation burden, the extra childcare burden that might be keeping the people they want to hire from getting a job and staying in that job long-term and succeeding. This is the way we're sort of integrating and doing our role at the regional council to work through the collective impact sort of model that REMAPI has set up and is driving. So I think that's the basis of my remarks. If you go to the next slide. I'd just like to sort of end with a couple really powerful notes. The governor was here in November to announce some of the initial funding through the regional council for those programs I mentioned. And there's been obviously a lot written for those of you who've been paying attention about how this is not something where any one of us, any organization, any service provider, any government is going to solve this on their own. It has to be us together taking the bull by the horns, which this community has been doing and is doing in a smart way so that this can be sustainable. It's not just about funding new programs, it's about doing it in a more coordinated way to restructure the system so that it's person-focused and results-oriented, and that together we have to do it in any way everybody can contribute. And that's why you see businesses contributing the way they're doing, the council doing it the same way. And it's encouraging to see, even though we have not yet started to move the needle on the really terrible statistics in our community, we are getting our act together and working together, now in a concerted period of time, in an effective way that I think has the potential to meet the goal that we set at the beginning of this program. So I think if you go to the next slide, that is it for me. I'm going to sit down or stand here, whatever it is, to take questions from our talented group. Thank you very much. Come over here, we'll stand and take questions.
Yeah. While they're coming up, I just want to point out that we are a very healthy committee. And that's Larry, who's working, Larry Burnett's working the slides, and Chris Pryor is somewhere. Where do you raise your hand? Because they worked hard on this committee. And Hassana was over here, I think. And Joe Rosenthal, I know you were there, and Sandy Frankel. So I really appreciate all the work that they have done, because they are the ones who really made this event. Now, I think it probably worked best if you just keep stepping in when somebody has a question. So I'll start pointing to people, and we'll start right here with Captain. And repeat, just a moment, just be sure to repeat the question.
The assets in the Beechwood and Emma neighborhoods, like you said that 80% of the smart home, that sort of asset, what would be another example of assets in these communities that made you choose them?
So the question was, what were some of the assets that made us choose the Market View, Beechwood, Emma, Bensonhurst neighborhoods as an initial starting point? So we looked at the data-driven analysis we did, looked at a variety of indicators, poverty, vacancy, crime. I think there were 7 positive and 5 negative indicators. On the positive side, in terms of assets, we looked at presence of schools and city facilities, access to transportation, proximity of jobs, and another one, something like that. But yeah, in general, though, we have the public market, which is a fantastic anchor for those neighborhoods. There's also the School 33 and the Ryan Center, which is mentioned as one of the largest elementary schools. It's also connected to a recreation center and a library, a real great asset for the neighborhoods there. And then, we have some exciting, redevelopment taking place on East Main Street and some momentum across the tracks from Village Gate, which is an up-and-coming area.
Okay, question over here? Yes.
Yes, mine is for Mr. Esposito, and if I get a backup for Mr. Fitz too. You generously said recently, and I quote, "Poverty can only be addressed if we collectively do things differently. But at the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, it consists of 35 board members, half of whom, and these represent a good portion of the wealth and political power in our region. I am concerned that over half of your board members receive public assistance, thus taking away money from poverty initiatives. And they do this in the form of large government grants and huge tax breaks.
Okay.
And I would like to know how you are going to change the attitudes on your board members. I doubt that your board members will do things differently, as you said.
Okay.
And I would like to know how you, at the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, can change the attitudes of your board members. And Mr. Fitz, I am very pleased about their transportation situation, and I know public transportation is very important in poverty issues. And I consider the Rochester Regional thing right now, disappointingly, as a retirement home for Maggie Brooks and her
Okay, let's focus on the question.
So you're absolutely correct. The Regional Council helps advise the state on distributing a lot of tax money in the form of grants, tax credits, and loans on an annual and ongoing basis. The $500 million from the Upstate Revitalization Initiative is just the largest funding source we use. Just today, in fact, the annual CFA process, which is a host of over 30 programs, opens up so people can apply to them. So that is their job. They're appointed to help advise the state. So the first thing I would say is they are advisory, and so they don't make those decisions themselves. But the really thing I want to emphasize, and I think getting into your question, is that the council has already started to change their own efforts and how they address these things, and is changing every day, just by evidence of the fact that they put poverty reduction as a primary goal in their strategic plan, which is not typically a goal, at least in my experience, for economic development programs, why they've implemented things like the anti-poverty impact statement so that they are helping to expose everyone who's involved in corporate America, but in our region, to help to play a role in overcoming the other burdens that people face in poverty. So I think it's happening already, but it's an ongoing job. It's why we've created this overlapping structure with RMAPI to try to continue that work, because I mean it when I said what you quoted, and that was we need to start doing things differently, because the same old has gotten us to where we are today, which is economic stagnation and poverty going in the wrong direction. So I think that's happening, and it's an ongoing challenge.
Who would like to ask a question over here? I'm trying to take turns. Okay, yes, go ahead.
My question is, there are programs that have, to my knowledge, had great success. For example, the Nurse-Family Partnership run by the county. Nobody seems to be able to argue that that program was wildly successful. My question is, why aren't we putting more support? Those statistics for childhood poverty are astounding, that they're at this worse level than they were before. And yet you have a program that's successful at the county, and we can't shake enough money loose to even support the existing programs. I'm not sure who I should address. I know you were in the county legislature. It's what can we do that things that are already up and operating to get them to be more successful. Head Start and Nurse-Family Partnership and those programs for early childhood.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. It's a great question. I know what you're getting at. One of the biggest challenges when RMAPI started 2 years ago is, all right, we have all these great programs. There's no way to scale up every one of them more. That can't be the answer. There's not enough money to do that. We have to figure out, first and foremost, how can we connect them better so that they're all more successful. That being said, there are many programs that are evidence-based, data-driven, so that Henry and people like him can analyze them from an independent point of view to determine which ones are successful, and we need to rank them. The one you mentioned, Nurse-Family Partnership, is one that is funded by the state and by the county and by the United Way and many other partners because it's successful. And we are in active conversations almost daily about using some of the $500 million to expand it in the RMAPI zone in a way that we can continue to measure its success and then hopefully scale it further. So, to answer your other question, the thing you can do is to continue to advocate for those programs that you know are evidence-based and successful, so that we can figure out, do we need to scale them further, or do we need to take things that we can learn from them to better connect them with other programs so that we're addressing all of a person's need as opposed to just having one really successful program. It's an enormous challenge within RMAPI with the hundreds of programs and providers we have in this community. The vast majority of them are really good. Right? So the answer can't just be, and I'm not suggesting you're saying, just throw money at any random number of them. It's to be focused, community-driven in terms of what are the ones that really work for people, and it can either be expanded or connected better. So that may seem like a general question, but I know specifically Nurse-Family Partnership, we're talking about expanding it right now using some of the state dollars as well as some other private dollars that are in this community. So if anybody else wants to add on to that.
This gentleman would like to ask a question.
Yeah, it might be for Betty. It was in this slide, but it's addressing structural racism was mentioned in that very complex slide you have there. Can you expand upon that, what that means, or one of the other panelists in terms of what you're focusing on in addressing structural racism?
Me?
It was in your slide.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a primary principle of RMAPI to identify structural racism in all policies going forward. The council has embraced that. That's why we put in place things like the anti-poverty impact statement so that companies, when they seek funding, or organizations when they seek funding, can tell us how they are addressing that, how they're overcoming barriers to hiring, to promotion, to training, the things that are baked into structural racism. But I would defer to Tori to answer that maybe more as a general level.
As Vinny said, I'm echoing just what he said, but you guys, I mean, if we look around this room, how many people of color are in here? So many times you walk into entities, organizations, and you see just this. So it's very few of us in an organization that are at the top. So we need you to advocate for people of color, and really sign on to those guiding principles and be champions for us, saying, you know, this is not right. It's not even a third of people of color in here. So really being a champion for us to say we need to break down these barriers for people of color so they can advance. Because a lot of times people are in poverty because they can't advance. It's not due to lack of skill, lack of education. There's just policies and structures embedded in organizations that prevent people of color from moving ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know who can answer this. This is
Well, Shauna's going to answer it no matter what.
I want to follow up with the previous comment on the nurse-family partnership. I know the second phase of your rollout, first you're doing the mentoring, and then it said in the paper that you're going to add the early childhood support, including the nurse-family partnership. And however, I understand the state has cut back money for this program, and so I'm wondering where, and you said the state's putting money in, so how are we going to add the state money to it, and who should we press, what legislators and whatever, to get more money, because it is one of the few evidence-based successful programs.
Yeah, the state has funded Nurse Family Partnership through Monroe County for several years. In the most recently passed state budget, I'm not aware of it being cut back. I'm not aware of it being expanded either. But that was through funding through the Office of Child and Family Services. That's in the state budget each year. What we're talking about expanding as part of the Regional Council's partnership with RMAPI is using some of the $500 million award to the Economic Development Council to expand that further. And so that's what I was referencing. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Unless that's additional money, because I've been reading the state cut.
I don't believe the state has cut back from Nurse Family from the funding that is used for Nurse Family Partnership this year. I could be wrong in that, but I don't believe that's the case.
Okay, any questions over there?
Anybody?
Yes, Ida?
Anybody know differently?
No, but
It would be a question.
see me after and I can
We
get
can
more
track it
information
down.
to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all.
I was just curious, all through everything I was thinking, what about daycare? What about daycare? What about daycare? As I grew up, or my son grew up with me as a single mom. His father was in the city, so he was involved. But it's a huge issue even for someone like me that had a corporate job and ended up having a decent salary over the course of my career. So I'm just curious about where we stand. I know there's been a lot of political gobbledygook over the years about funding and blah, blah, blah. But where do we stand in terms of affordable, available daycare? And I also had one little thing included in structural racism, and it's still an issue in this community, big time, is gender equality. So not just racial equality, but also gender equality. It's still an issue. There's still a board full of guys, typically, more so than a balanced group of people on board. So just something to keep in mind. In that gender.
Women's equality, you're absolutely right, that's a whole other forum, I'm sure you've done a few of them. Childcare and affordable childcare has been an issue for a long time. There's a lot shifting right now. The federal government is changing standards in terms of the level of quality care that can be serviced through affordable grants. The state government's money has not been increasing in a way that keeps up with those standards. So the net effect is in this year's budget, there actually are fewer affordable child care slots in our community going forward. That's a problem because child care is one of the top barriers that RMAPI's identified. It's a dual generational thing. It not only helps the children develop, but also helps people work, which helps them get out of poverty and become self-sufficient. So it is one of the components of the early childhood supports. We focused on Nurse Family Partnership. There's actually 5 things that are in early child supports. Expanding the subsidized daycare slots in our community in the RMAPI zone is also part of that active conversation and one we're hoping to use money for. And elementary. Yes.
And with Connected Communities, our goal is really to help subsidize that even further. So in some of the purpose-built communities across the country, there are early childhood, very high-quality early childhood centers that are at at the heart of these communities that are being serviced, so that everyone who lives in that community, provided that there are enough slots, will have the opportunity to place their children in these subsidized, high-quality childcare centers. So that is ultimately a goal of ours as well in the Beechwood and Emma neighborhood.
Is there capacity within, I apologize, but is there capacity within like School 33 for something like that?
In terms of physical space?
Yeah.
There's not starting at 6 weeks, which is where we would like to start. They do currently have EPK as well as pre-K, and we'd like to see the number of those slots expand there, but currently they're not able to handle early childhood development. But there are some very high quality programs right in the neighborhood. Caring and Sharing Childcare is one. We've been talking with ABC Head Start as well. So there are numerous talks that are being had to be able to provide this service right in the neighborhood, because it's not just availability, it's also accessibility. So families being able to not be hindered by transportation, being able to walk to these high quality child care centers, and then also get their other children to elementary school, high school, etc.
Hi, nice job, by the way. I thought it was an exceptional presentation. I historically had, I struggle with the way that in order to make sure that we're successful as we tackle really difficult problems, sometimes what we do is we've got a stack of the problems here. Everybody here, you know, they're okay. We get here, so we want our programs to be successful, so we often kind of go down this far in the pile of problems. And what happens in the people on the bottom is they tend to churn and drop further and further. So I guess with that as a backdrop, my question is as we tackle the low-hanging fruit, if you will, the best we can, and go into that pile a little bit, is there some plan for helping those folks that tend to get recycled back down to the bottom of the pile? And what might something like that look like?
Okay, good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think if I understand it correctly, you're saying we're tackling some of the low-hanging fruit with adult mentoring and those kinds of programs, but there are other people who have other needs that are not being addressed by those programs.
Yes, and I'm not saying that approaching it the way that we are is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that over time, what happens is folks like that get left in the dust once again.
Yeah. So I think that's where we're going in terms of this whole collective impact process. The goal is that people don't fall through the cracks, that we're addressing a spectrum, a very wide spectrum of needs through adult mentoring. When families are enrolled into that program, all of the needs of the family is looked at. So it's not just a transportation issue, it's not just finding a job, it's not just healthcare, but it's every single problem and barriers that a family may face. That assigned mentor, the staff mentor, is there to help them overcome those hurdles. And likewise with Connected Communities, we're taking a holistic approach. That's why we're looking at education, health and wellness, workforce and economic development, and then housing as well. All of those things are being done simultaneously to really address these needs so that people don't slip through the cracks. And more than that, we're looking across the spectrum of services that are already being provided, making sure, again, that they're not just available, but they're accessible, that programs are talking to each other. There's a lot of background stuff that's happening in terms of having data systems being able to be accessed by other programs that historically have not been able to tap into that data, so that you can see who's being serviced and where they're being serviced. And that also ensures that there's not a duplication of services being, one family is not getting too many services and another family over here isn't getting any service. So that there's a whole lot that's happening behind the scenes to make sure that people don't fall through those cracks.
I want to add on. You want to add on to that?
I just.
Yeah, I think so.
And for people that are coming to adult mentoring, the Bridges to Success, and we've already slated the pilot area, if they still come to us or Catholic Family Services and say that, you know, they want to enroll in the program, but they don't fit, we have connected with other organizations such as ABC, and there's the Swiffy grant out there to really help with a handoff. So I don't want to use that term, but we don't want people to lose hope. Just because they can't get in the adult mentoring or Bridges to Success program, we still want them to know that there's help available to them, and we're providing a conduit to another program that may be more suitable for them. Does that make sense?
I want to add on that. This is a really good question, and it really illustrates a point. When we talk about this being stark and dire, they're not kidding. Right now, the numbers are about 70,000 people just in the city of Rochester who are living in poverty. If we're successful at a wildly ambitious goal of reducing that by 50% after 15 years, that means you still, by default, have more than 30,000 people who are living in poverty. So this work, as important and challenging it is to help people who are maybe the working poor get out of that level. By the way, that's just the poverty level. That's not a self-sufficiency or living wage level. That's just the federal poverty level. That's going to be still a lot of people impacted by poverty. And that's why the safety net and the social supports that exist throughout all those great programs in our community are still going to be as important as ever. Because at some level, some people are not going to be deriving income on their own to provide themselves a way out of poverty. These social supports are going to need to continue to exist, even if we're successful at coordinating all this work. So it just illustrates the point of how important everything we're doing is.
Thank you.
Just to throw a statistics in there, for one person, the poverty level, at the federal poverty level is $11,000 a year, a little over, and for a family of four is $24,000, so you can see what we're talking about.
Okay, Sandy. Yeah, I have two questions. They're practical in nature. The adult, and they speak to the priorities. One is the adult mentoring program. Are you recruiting volunteers to be mentors, or is that mentoring being provided by paid staff? And if you're recruiting, how is that going? And the other question relates to the neighborhood or community schools, which I think is excellent. But there is the push for school choice, and that really conflicts with what your goal is. So what approaches are you taking to try and come back to the community school approach?
So I'm going to take the adult mentoring question. So the adult mentoring, as I mentioned, and then Henry mentioned, there's two models. One is a peer-to-peer model, which you could probably sign up and be a volunteer, but then there's also a professional model, which that is through paid staff. So they are paid, trained through a specialty resource where they are trained to be professional mentors to help people navigate the system.
I understand the two models. I'm wondering if you are actively recruiting volunteers right now.
We are not recruiting volunteers, we are recruiting participants to enroll in the program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And to address the community school question, the first thing we started with, because we're a very grassroots organization, as I mentioned in my presentation, is with the residents. So our residents have said that they want to do this. We're going to begin starting some community focus groups throughout the neighborhood to really hone in on specifically what residents mean when they say they want a community school. What we do understand is that kids are being bused all over the place, and the district has about a $64 million busing bill for school busing. So we also have to work with the district because it's currently district policy that the managed choice process continues. However, there are about 50% of families that don't enter the managed choice process. So for those of you who don't understand what the managed choice process is, it basically is if you live in the city of Rochester, you can fill out an application and you can send your children to any schools that are in your zone. And the reason that that happened in the early 2000s is because there was a lot of disparity among schools. But if we look across the board now with our schools, they're all about even.
So there's not a whole lot of choice that families are getting, but we can backpedal a little bit and say, what can we gain from a sense of community and neighborhood and having parents actually physically be able to go into the building. There are families who have never even figured out where their children's school are located because transportation is a challenge. And I have 3 or 4 or 5 younger children, and I can't get them all on a bus to go across town for a parent-teacher conference. So working to get collaboratively with the school, and community school, I should add, is more than just having kids in the neighborhood attend that school. That means that there's a wide array of resources that are available to the entire family, not just the children that attend that school, but the parents, as well as their siblings, if the siblings, let's say, are in high school, as opposed to in elementary school. So we're starting on the ground level, working with the residents so that they can specifically advocate and we can move their voices along. And we're also working very closely with our new superintendent, who has stated in her 100-day plan that community schools and neighborhood schools is a priority of hers. And we're working across the city of Rochester to make sure that it's not just an Emma and Beechwood thing, but we're hearing from residents across the city to get their opinion about that. So that's our first steps.
Okay, one more question. All right, yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you. This was so informative, and my head is spinning, and my question is, so many different programs were mentioned, so many different resources. Is there one place to go with this project where you can research things that may interest your particular non-for-profit?
United Way website. There are a list of volunteer opportunities that are listed. You can go through it through endingpovertynow.org, but it's definitely on the United Way website.
Not just for volunteering, but I mean as resources for, I'm a volunteer for a non-for-profit for the RAIN program. So I'm curious to know if there's needs with our families. Where is the consolidated list of all those resources?
I think you can definitely contact 211, and they have a lot of documentation on the resources that are available.
Volunteer match as well, or
Arlene mentioned volunteer match.
Yes.
Just briefly, will your presentations be made available to us, your slideshows?
Yes. Yes, it will be on YouTube. And I'm not sure how you access it. How do you do that? LWV?
It's actually, if you do League of Women Voters Rochester YouTube.
There you
It will
go.
take you there. Also, you can go to our website, which is lwv-rma.org. There'll be a link there.
Thank you.
It'll take a few days to post the video.
We have to be out of here by 9. Do you have a fast question?
I do. A lot of cities in other areas of the country that have a lot of poverty have had success at a very grassroots level through things that were called little councils or neighborhood associations that actually were street to street and so forth. Is our neighborhood too transient? Are these neighborhoods too transient for us to adopt that similar grassroots model?
No, we do have quite a bit of transients in the neighborhoods, but we also have long-term stable residents who have lived in those neighborhoods for 40 or more years even. Particularly in the Beechwood neighborhood, they have a very strong neighborhood association that has been active for the last 25 years. They have a board of directors, they use Robert rules. I present at that neighborhood meeting, which is open to the public the first Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. And there's a lot of information that's given out to residents. Likewise, in the Emma neighborhood, they have a monthly meeting. And then we have numerous, Connected Communities has numerous groups that engage residents. For instance, we have a housing interest group. There's some concern about landlords in the neighborhood that are out of state and some are out of the country, and they're not screening their tenants properly or they're not servicing their properties properly. So we are taking a very grassroots approach to addressing some of those issues. So there are numerous people in that neighborhood who really care about the climate and culture of that community and who are coming out to meetings on a regular basis, are sitting on the CAC that Tori had mentioned, the Community Advisory Council, are made up of residents living throughout the county who really care about these issues. So I would say no, the transience is not going to stop us from being able to engage residents. Now, is it going to allow us to engage every single person in the community? Probably not, but there is a significant number of folks who are involved and engaged.
Okay. So it's my job to say thank you, and if you want to ask any more questions, you're not running away, are you? And I thank them. You have been wonderful in answering and bringing the information, and you can tell the community is interested. Mary's coming over to give you the final blessing. Don't forget to fill out the evaluation form and tell us how you heard about the program, okay? Our forum tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us this evening for this important discussion, which obviously must continue. We're so grateful to Georgia DiGregorio and our own Poverty Committee, to Tori Tolliver Powers, LaShunda Leslie Smith, Henry Fitz, and Vinny Esposito, to our hosts here at Asbury First United Methodist Church, and to all the members of our league who made this forum possible. You'll find materials from the League of Women Voters and also from each of the organizations represented here on the table as you leave. And our website is lwv-rma.org. You will find a link to the YouTube recording of this evening on that website, as well as a lot of other resources. Thank you so much.